was Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder family was settling in for the night in their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. 9 of the 10 kids were asleep. The tree lights were still glowing. It should have been one of those nights that you remembered years later because it was perfect. Instead, it's remembered for something else entirely. Just after 1 a.m., a fire broke out. George and Jenny woke up to smoke pouring through the house. They rushed to get their kids out. 4 of them made it. 5 didn't. But here's the part that's haunted people for nearly 80 years. No bodies were ever found. Not a trace. Not even a bone. The fire burned the house to the ground in under an hour, but somehow left no remains. The fire department didn't show up until the morning. The official story? The fire got so hot it completely cremated the 5 missing children. But Jenny Sodder didn't believe it. George didn't believe it. And the more they looked for answers, the stranger it all became. A missing ladder, a phone line cut, trucks that wouldn't start, people who claimed they'd seen the kids after the fire. And then, years later, a photograph mailed anonymously of a man who might have been one of their missing sons, all grown up. It was something the Sodders never stopped fighting to uncover. And nearly a century later, we're still asking the same question. What really happened to the Sodder children that night? The fire started just after 1 a.m. Jenny Sodder woke up to the sound of something hitting the roof, then a rolling noise. Minutes later, smoke was pouring into her bedroom. She called for George. They grabbed their youngest, and together they woke up 4 of the kids sleeping downstairs. But the 5 others, the ones sleeping upstairs, didn't answer. George tried everything to get them. First, he smashed into a window to get back inside. Then he tried to climb up the side of the house. The ladder that was always propped against the house, gone. He ran to start his trucks to use them to climb on top of, to climb into the house. Neither of them would turn over. Trucks that had been working perfectly the day before, they wouldn't start. By now, the fire was ripping through the home. The heat was unbearable. George could not get inside. Neighbors tried calling the fire department, but nobody answered. Somebody finally reached an operator, but the fire department wouldn't arrive for 7 more hours. By the time firefighters showed up, the house was a smoking pile of ash. The Sodders stood there, waiting for answers, waiting for remains. But when the firefighters sifted through the rubble, nothing. No bones, no bodies, no sign of the 5 missing children. The fire chief told them the blaze had been so hot, it completely incinerated the kids' bodies. But Jenny wasn't buying it. She knew that's not how fire works. She tested it herself, burned chicken bones in the stove, cremated animal bones, and no matter what she did, bones were always left behind. And that's when the Sodders started to wonder, if the fire didn't take them, what did? The official story was pretty simple. Faulty wiring. That's what the fire chief told them. A bad circuit sparked the blaze, burned the house down, and somehow managed to cremate 5 bodies so thoroughly that nothing, not teeth, no bones, no trace was left behind. But the more George and Jenny looked at the facts, the less sense it made. For starters, the Christmas lights had been on as the fire started. If it was an electrical fire, wouldn't the power have cut out immediately? And how about the smell? No burning flesh, no burning bones, and the speed? 45 minutes from standing home to nothing but ash. Then there was the ladder. It hadn't burned. It wasn't even at the house, where it always was. It was found thrown down an embankment nearly 75 feet away. And George's trucks, the ones he planned to climb on top of to get to the 2nd floor, both dead as a doornail, as if someone had tampered with them. And what about the phone line? Initially, they were told that the fire melted it. Later, they learned it had been cut. Someone had climbed the pole and snipped the line before the fire even started. The Sodders started asking around, and that's when things got even stranger. A man came forward, claiming he'd threatened George over outspoken views about Mussolini. George had been publicly critical of the fascist leader, No small thing in a tight-knit Italian immigrant community in the 1940s. Your house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed, the man allegedly warned him. Suddenly, the idea that this was just a tragic accident started to unravel, and a new, darker possibility started to take its place. What if the fire wasn't the tragedy? What if it was the cover-up? Soon, the rumors started, and they weren't coming from the fringe weirdos. They were coming from regular people who swore they'd seen the Sodder children after the fire. A woman working at a tourist stop 50 miles away claimed that she saw the kids in a car the morning after the fire, peering out of the windows while a group of adults hustled them along. Another woman said she'd served them breakfast at a motel with two men of Italian descent who refused to let the children speak. Then came the reports from Florida, then New York, different towns, different sightings, all with the same basic description. 5 kids resembling the Sodder children, never speaking, always with unfamiliar adults. And then in 1968, over 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived at the Sodder home. No return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his 20s, dark eyes, strong features. On the back was a handwritten note. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Little boys. And then some letters and numbers that don't really make a lot of sense. It looked like Louis, older, alive, but the message, completely cryptic. No one's ever figured out what exactly it means. George and Jeannie hired a private detective to track down the sender. The detective took the photo, promised to investigate, and was never heard from again. Meanwhile, George kept fighting. He put up a giant billboard along Route 16 with the photos of the 5 missing kids and the words kidnapped. For years, it stood as a quiet challenge to the official story and a symbol of the family's refusal to let the world forget. They followed every lead, chased every tip, and every single time the trail went cold. It was like the children had been erased from the planet. At every turn, George and Jeannie hit a wall. The fire chief, remember him, admitted something years later. During the search of the ashes, he'd found a human organ, claimed it was a heart. Instead of sending it to the authorities, he said he burned it in a metal box at the scene. Eventually, they dug it up and had it tested. Turns out, it wasn't a heart after all. It was beef liver, and it hadn't been touched by fire. Why was it there? No explanation, no follow-up, just another bizarre twist in a case already overflowing with them. Police refused to reopen the investigation. The fire department wouldn't revisit the site. The official line remained. The children died in the fire. Case closed. But George and Jeannie couldn't let it go. They knew what fire does. They knew what fire doesn't do. And they knew the answers they were being given weren't adding up. George spent the rest of his life chasing leads. He traveled across the country following every rumor, every sighting, every anonymous tip. He spent money he didn't have, knocked on doors of strangers who might have been holding the key, and every single time, he came back empty-handed. Jenny wore black for the rest of her life, refused to celebrate Christmas again. The billboard stayed up until George died in 1969, and when it finally came down, it wasn't because the mystery had been solved. It was because the people fighting for answers were gone. The official story never changed, but the Sodders and plenty of others never believed it. And honestly, once you start pulling at the threads, it's hard to believe that official story. After George and Jenny were gone, their surviving children kept the search alive for a while. But as the years passed, the case faded from headlines. The billboard eventually came down. The photo of Louis stayed tucked inside a box, and the family quietly stopped looking. But the questions never really went away. How does a fire consume 5 children so completely that not a tooth is left behind? How does a ladder move itself from the house to the ditch? How do 2 trucks, perfectly functional the day before, both refuse to start in an emergency? And what kind of fire burns so clean it leaves no bones, but doesn't destroy household appliances sitting in the rubble? Every answer feels like it raises another question. Every explanation leaves something hanging in the air, unresolved, uncomfortable. And maybe that's why this story refuses to die, because at the end of the day, it's not just about 5 missing kids. It's about a family that couldn't stop looking for them, a fire that didn't burn the way it should have, a town full of silence. It's about the terrifying possibility that sometimes the answers we're given aren't the real answers at all, and that whatever happened that night in 1945, someone still knows. Thanks for listening to this episode of 10-Minute Mystery. I'm Joe, I'm the host of it, and if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you rate and review, share it with your friends and family, and also, the most important thing, be sure you're subscribed to 10-Minute Mystery. If you like the brief and bingeable vibe of this show, and maybe you're looking for something a little darker, you can check out my other podcast, very similar, but we talk about something else. It's true crime. It's called 10-Minute Murder. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.